History of the Maya. The Popol View. The Popol View is an ancient Mayan text telling the history and mythology of the Kish Maya. The narrative follows four brothers Belamquits, Bulamagab, Muakutu and Ikibulam. The first chapter of this book is a corrupted version of the Great Flood and the Tower of Babel, which is known to them as Tulan. So, they lived in joy, the black men and the white together, and they had but one language. They lived awaiting the rising of the sun, but no sun came, and the four men and their descendants grew uneasy. "We have no person to watch over us," they said, "nothing to guard our symbols." So, the four men and their people set out for Tulan's Uiva, otherwise called the Seven Caves, and there they received gods, each man as head of a family, a god. Bulamquits received the god Tohil, Bulamagab, the god of Ilix, and Muakutu, the god Hakavits, all very powerful gods, but Tohil, the creator of fire, was the god of the whole Kish nation. The tribes of Tamub and Ilokab likewise received gods at the same time. Here also the language of all the families was confused, so that no one of the first four men could any longer understand the speech of another. Therefore, they decided to leave Tulan. Some went eastwards and some came this way. And their hearts grieved, for long was the way and many of them were left on the road. Nevertheless, they passed to this side as if there had been no sea, for they passed on scattered stones, and they called the place Arranged Stones and Torn Sands, a name which was given them in their passage in the inside of the sea. So clearly, this is talking about the Mayans leaving Babel and crossing the Bering Strait, or perhaps the Aleutian Islands, which in these times likely extended closer to Asia. The text then reads, "And the people multiplied on Mount Hakavits, and here they built their city." And later states, "Thus disappeared on Mount Hakavits the first men, who came from the east, from the other side of the sea. Long time had they been here when they died, and they were very old, and surnamed the venerated and the sacrificers." Hakavits has not been identified, but the temple of Hakavits was located at the Kish capital Cumakaj, located in the highlands of Guatemala. Next it states that the sons of those who built the city went back over the sea to the east, where they met a lord called Naxit, who acknowledged them as royalty and gave them symbols of lordship. It is not specified where Naxit was located. It says thus they passed over the sea, arriving there in the east. They went there to receive their lordship. The text also reveals they brought back writings from Tulan, which was a city-state at that point. They then traveled back to Hakavits and likely spent many years there, because they became many. They then left the site of their fathers and settled innumerable mountains. Now dating these events is very tricky. The Maya calendar starts in 3114 BC. But it says that the forefathers of the Maya came from the east, with no specific time mentioned between Tulan and the crossing of the Bering Strait. Perhaps these people were influenced by South Asian culture and possibly even kept contact with them as they lived in Central America. Archaeologists continue to push back the history of the Maya towards common dating of the Tower of Babel, which I believe occurred in around 2488 BC. Historians claim that the Maya civilization originated in 2600 BC, which is just an estimate. I personally believe that the forefathers of the Maya crossed the Bering Strait, or the Aleutian Islands, within 800 years of the flood. I estimate this by common dating of Joseph's famine, which likely occurred in the 19th century BC. Joseph's famine was a worldwide famine. So unless those in the Americas came back to the Old World, they weren't in the Old World until after the famine. So, according to this text, the Mayan patriarchs were likely acquainted with some civilization in the east, crossed the Bering Strait sometime after the confounding of languages at Tulan, built a city in the highlands of Guatemala, died there, and their sons traveled back over the Bering Strait to be given their right of rulership, and traveled back to Central America and built more cities. Now I would say that the civilization the forefathers and their sons were acquainted with was the Indus Valley civilization. mainly because of clear cultural similarities between certain pre-Columbian civilizations and India. Just one of the many examples of this is the lost city of the monkey god. Also known as the White City, the White City has been a mystery ever since Hernan Cortés spoke of its potential riches in the 16th century. It remained a mystery until it was identified in 2012, and has sparked controversy and debate of its true origins. But the statue found on the site is extremely reminiscent of a Hindu monkey god and a mysterious lost city called Hanuman. According to Cortés, the local people of the city worship giant monkey statues and its riches exceeded those of Tenochtitlan. The earliest mention of the monkey god in Hindu texts dates back from the 1500s to the 1200s BC. Now can I definitively state that these were Hindus? Though the similarities are there, no. But just as the Greek gods were influenced by Egyptian gods, so were pre-Columbian Americans likely influenced by Hindu culture, if not actual Hindus. Continuing on, the Popol Vuh tells of a new city founded by Cogabe, Coaquetec, and Coahor, the descendants of the patriarchs. This new fortress was called Chiquix. And after 4 generations of lords had passed, the Mayans rediscovered a citadel of their fathers, naming it Chiizmequi, rebuilding the citadel with lime plaster and whitewash. Here Conache and Biluebka ruled with an appointed lord magistrate. Lord Cthulhu and Isdale ruled as Arpop, meaning chief or leader, and Apop of the reception house, with 2 swollen great houses, one for each of the 2 divisions. At this point there was no contention or envy, and they had not become great. And they strengthened their defenses and were sovereign. But the Ilocab, who also came from the east, instigated a conflict. Desiring only one lord over them, they demanded that Cthulhu be killed. But because his tale would not proceed, the Ilocab attempted to invade the citadel and set themselves up as rulers. This invasion failed, and the Kish took the Ilocab captive and sacrificed some of them to their false god. Others were enslaved and subjected to a life of servitude. This is said to be the foundation of the greatness of the Kish. After abandoning and building new citadels, division arose again due to strife over the marriage price of their sisters and daughters. First, they defiled the remains of each other's dead, and then split apart, making 9 lineage divisions, with many lords per lineage. Again, they multiplied and began to organize themselves politically. Arpop is the highest ranking office in Kish hierarchy. Arpop of the reception house is the 2nd highest ranking office. And Artohil and Arquqmats are the priests of the 2 major deities. Other offices were head of the ruling council, ambassador, counselor of ball court judgment, and overseer of the hall. The lords then had their vassals and slaves build homes for themselves and their gods. These homes were likely palaces or villas which were set apart from the common man's home. The lords were beloved by the people and respected by the slaves and their subjects. So, they multiplied in their canyon citadel. Qmats was the most feared lord, because he held religious superiority over them. He is described as the grandeur of his descendants. He overthrew lords of nations and became the head of the nations. Qmats was the 4th generation of lords. The 6th generation of lords saw 2 great rulers, Quiab and Coizima. These 2 conquered both small and great nations and subjected every nation around them to pay tribute. In these times there were also those who went out to capture males and females for royal servitude and labor slavery. Quiab also set up blockades, advancing defenses, and the sentinel lineage became the lineage of watchmen. 6 citadels did Quiab have dominion over. And the 3 groups of the Kish were unified, and some were ennobled as military chiefs, some as border masters and some as defense masters. Some early Mayan religious customs are described in this passage. The nations would enter therein, to burn offerings before Tohil first. Then they would worship the Arpop and Arpop of the reception house. So, just as the pharaohs were seen as gods on earth and mediators, The Kish Mayans viewed the two highest offices as gods and worshipped them. It goes on to describe how the people viewed their rulers Qqmat and Kutuhe were enchanted people and enchanted lords. Quiqab and Khoizima were also enchanted lords. They knew if there would be war. It was clear before their faces. They saw if there would be death, if there would be hunger. They surely knew if there would be strife. There was an instrument of sight, there was a book. Popol Vuh was their name for it. But it was not only because of this that they were lords. They were great in their essence. Great as well were their fasts. In order to venerate their temples and venerate their sovereignty, they fasted for long periods of time, and sacrificed before the faces of their gods. Here we also see that the Mayans farmed maize. Something they likely began as soon as their forefathers arrived in the land. The lords also in these times seemingly mined precious metals, jade, precious stones, and gathered various kinds of rare feathers. The Popol Vuh goes on to list the different generations of rulers starting with Burlamquits, who was the first generation, and ending with the Spanish victory over the Kish, which was the 12th generation. Now the history of the Kish is very odd. According to historians, they rose in the mid-13th century AD. I believe that the mainstream dating of these figures and events is wrong. But, the forefathers of the Maya mentioned in the Popol Vuh are not mentioned in Genesis. Either they were sons of one of the people mentioned in Genesis, most likely descendants of Rama or Sheba, who would settle India. Rama and Sheba descended from Cush. Kish does sound an awful lot like Cush. The flood and Tower of Babel were passed down orally generation to generation. And different civilizations gave different names to Noah and his 3 sons. The 4 patriarchs in the Popol Vuh obviously represent Noah and his 3 sons. And the Maya renamed these 4, giving them Mayan names. But I do believe that the 4 patriarchs of the Maya listed in this book are the actual forefathers of the Maya. They just weren't at Babel. My problem with mainstream dating of the Kish forefathers is that the Mayan calendar begins at 3114 BC. So how could the first 4 men created have lived in 1250 AD? Did the Mayans believe the world was created in the 13th century AD? I doubt it. Perhaps where the narrative stops and the listing of the generations begins, is where their history is disrupted. It doesn't make sense. And either way you look, the answer cannot be absolute. I believe that the Popol Vuh compiled some old leaders with some new leaders into a 12-generation list, listing the most notable people in Kish history. Because of the lack of information on people like Burlamquits and Quiqab, it's almost as if these were prehistoric figures who lived in the 2nd and 1st millennium BC. The Popol Vuh was penned down by a Mayan author in the Kish language in 1554 and 1558. Before this version was lost, it was translated into Spanish in the 18th century. But some aspects of the Popol Vuh date back to the late pre-classic period. This is of course only what we've found. For centuries historians believed the Old Testament was pure myth. But when archaeologists began digging up some of the cities found in the Bible and found texts that agreed with the Bible, they began to accept some of it as truth. Though most archaeologists and historians do not accept the entirety of the Old Testament as truth. Commentators of the Popol Vuh believe the same about Tulan. But in the same way that they were wrong about the Bible being pure myth, I believe they are wrong about the Popol Vuh being pure myth. This rejection of the Popol Vuh and clear references to the Bible just shows that their worldview keeps them from acknowledging the truth. Societies that were isolated for 13,000 years do not come up with the same stories, such as the Tower of Babel. There is the truth, which is the Bible, which tells the true history of the world. And then there are texts like the Popol Vuh, which corrupt the truth and mix in their own culture and religion. So, make sure to stay tuned for part 2, which will dive into Maya history from the pre-classic period to the modern day. Thank you for watching, and peace.